Welcome to the Pure Passion Podcast with Dr. David Kyle Foster. This podcast and our many other resources are made possible by our donors. Please support this ministry by going to our website, masteringlife.org.
Welcome to Pure Passion. I'm David Kyle Foster, your host. We have Dr. Julie Hamilton with us for a second time in as many weeks. You've got to watch last week's or listen to last week's episode because it was just chock full of information for some of the causal factors of homosexual confusion, some of the things that cause it, especially within a family. Sometimes there are things, sexual abuse, that sort of thing, even outside the family. So there's a multiplicity of factors that converge with the personality and the experiences of the child that can create this unique mix that can create same-sex attractions. And so make sure you go back and see that or listen to that podcast. And we're going to pick up where we left off. So let's do a quick review, Julie. What did we talk about last week in terms of what the Bible says about, what we talked about?
Yes. Okay. So we did talk about that gender is important, gender matters, that marriage is God's design, a beautiful, wonderful design of a male and a female coming together, and the fact that a man and a woman together can produce life. God produces life for them. And we were talking about some of the needs that children have growing up, and that when those needs aren't met, and again, like you said, it's a combination of factors, but it can lead a child to having, there are things that can happen that can lead a child to having same-sex attractions. So things like the same-sex bonding, things like that. Yeah.
So an inability to emotionally bond with same-sex parent can be a factor. Child abuse can be a factor. Not bonding with the peers can be a factor. Bullying.
Yes.
Lack of affirmation. What else am I missing?
Yes. Well, many of those things, all those things, and perceptions. We talked about how
perception.
It's not just what happens to a child, but how the child perceives it, how they take it in and internalize it. And sometimes temperament affects perception. So a child with a more sensitive temperament might take things in at a deeper level and maybe even take in things in a way that they weren't intended, perceiving rejection when rejection might not even be happening.
Yeah. And then we talked about, we started talking about what can parents do who, in listening to all of this, think, well, maybe some of that was going on in our family system. How do I fix that? How do I reverse that? How is it too late, or how does that work?
Right. So when parents recognize that they've made mistakes, it's so important to realize that God can restore. He can, first of all, forgive us. And then if it's intentional, and if it's just something we didn't know, he can redeem those mistakes and bring good out of it. And so I always encourage parents to go to God with any realizations of past mistakes and really ask him to turn that into something good and to guide in restoring what needs to be restored. And yes, parents, especially if their children are still young, parents can begin to interact differently and meet the needs that maybe weren't met. And even when children are older, parents can make things right by acknowledging, by asking forgiveness if there were things that were hurtful that were done or deficits. And for adults who have wounding from the past, then it's important for that adult to seek the help. So in other words, if the child of the parent has become an adult, then that child can go and seek out help, healing through whether it's therapy or inner healing, or even just growing spiritually themselves and seeking God's healing in their lives. So parents can do their part. And of course, parents have more of a role the younger the child is.
And a lot of their perceptions are incorrect, just like a lot of the perceptions of a child could be incorrect. So, and parents tend to just fill themselves with all kinds of guilt. Oh no, I've ruined my child. I'm responsible for everything. But the truth is, God will forgive them just as much as he will forgive anybody else. And they are not the end all and be all of their child's future. The child is an autonomous being and needs to have their own relationship with God and find the healing there. So it's not the end of the road.
Yes, that's right. That's right. Yes. It's important that parents understand. We talked about this last time, that usually most parents do the best that they can with what they've been given.
Yeah.
And many times, as you learn and look back, of course, they say hindsight is 2020. It's always easier to see looking back what we could have done differently. But in the situation, it's not always that clear. So it is important for parents to recognize that beating themselves up and assuming more responsibility than they need to is not going to be a healthy thing either.
Right. And they quite possibly had no idea that the child was going through what the child was going through. So
Yes.
there's no ground for their self-guilt.
Yes, that's right. Yes. Yeah.
So what if you have a child who's developed same-sex attraction, they've embraced it, they've entered the lifestyle, and the whole question about, do you go to a gay wedding of your child, and what if they start to manipulate you with, if you don't go to the wedding, you're never going to see me again, or if you don't embrace my homosexuality, I'm going to cut you off and never talk to you. What does a parent do in a situation where the child has entered into and embraced that lifestyle in an antagonistic way?
Yes, yes. I would say first pray for wisdom. And the second thing I think that to hold on to is the importance of love and truth. So parents have to do, first of all, they need to continue to love. Love is unconditional. God loves us. Even when we go astray from him, he loves us, and nothing changes his love. And so I think for parents, it's important to continue loving their child and conveying to their child that they love them. But love does not mean doing things that would compromise the parent's own value system. Love doesn't mean doing things that might enable a child, just like anything a child and even an adult child does. Parents don't have to agree, they don't have to support, they don't have to go along with it. And really, to have a relationship, there needs to be mutual understanding that the parent may not agree with and support everything the child does, and the child may not agree with everything the parent believes or stands on, but you can still agree to disagree and be in relationship. Yeah. When an adult child is being unreasonable and saying, you have to see it my way, you have to support me, you have to do things my way, it's really, that's an imbalance in the relationship, because being in a relationship with anybody usually is going to mean agreeing to disagree. Yeah. So loving does not mean you have to go along with everything or you have to support everything. And that's again, I know that a lot of parents are pushed to that by their kid, but really the conversation needs to be about what's reasonable. It's a two-way street. Tolerance is a two-way street, not just the kids should not be demanding you have to see it my way or do it my way, or else it's really unreasonable.
And in these confrontations of parent and child, usually there's a lack of respect between the two. The child is judging the parent, maybe for what they did wrong or for not accepting them the way they are. The parent may not be respecting the child. All they see is the sexual behavior and identity, and often they'll pound them with Bible verses, and there's just no respect there. And so you can't have communication without that respect. And then going back to the parent who takes it upon themselves to bring the healing to their child. They take that responsibility on themselves with the adult child. I've got a great example of what's wrong with that. My mother, of course, was apoplectic over my lifestyle in Hollywood. And she was always trying to figure out what to say to me, what to do, and she was lying on the beach in Delaware one day by herself, and she's pounding on the sand, just going, God, why don't you do something? Why don't you tell me what to do? And a voice, she audibly heard it. God spoke from the clouds and he said, trust me.
Oh, yes. Yes.
And it occurred to her that even though she thought she was trusting God, she really hadn't been trusting God. And so she just delivered me into God's arms, and just had the faith at that point to believe that God knew exactly what to do and that he loved me as much as she did, and that he was going to bring things to pass.
That's wonderful. That's a beautiful story. And
Yeah.
that's exactly right. It's learning to let go and surrender those we love in any relationship, really realizing we don't have control. We can't control anyone else's life, and that we need to surrender them, let go fully, and give them to God. And trust is the key. In order to surrender, it requires trusting that there is a God who loves us and a God who we can trust, a God who will get us through and do what he says he'll do. So yes, trusting him and letting go. And so parents can continue to love their child. They can make decisions for themselves, what they're able to do or not do, whether they're able to go to a wedding or not go to a wedding. Parents can decide for themselves, but they can't be making decisions for their child or trying to control their child or manipulating. You're right. There needs to be mutual respect and understanding.
I run into a lot of mothers who don't realize it, but they're smothering their son. In particular, this happens, and they just don't see it. They perceive it as loving their son, but indeed they're emotionally smothering. Talk about that.
And that's a tough one, I think, for a lot of, mothers have such an important role in the lives of their children, and they sacrifice so much. They give, they carry the child in their womb, and then they sustain life through feeding their child, and then they raise their child. And it is sometimes hard to begin to ease out of that role. You start out as a mother, you start out as really, helping to keep your child alive, keep them safe and all of that. But over time, there's one thing I think that's important is always remembering children are on loan to us from the Lord. They're not ours. We don't possess them and own them. God gives us children to take care of, but they're his, they're not ours. So I think that mindset is important from the very beginning. And then realizing that it's a parent's job to equip their child to eventually be independent, where they are not, gradually over time, the child grows in independence and they're a separate being, that you become kind of more, it's more of you start
advisor.
out. Yes, exactly. Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
So, yeah. And that is sometimes hard for parents, but I think recognizing that it's the goal. The goal is to raise a child to be independent, and that they really were never our possession to begin with. They belong to God, and we're just doing our job to pour into their lives to get them ready to launch into adulthood.
Yeah. Let's begin talking about what can a parent do to prevent sexual identity confusion in the child. I know there must be a number of parents out there who are just beginning to have a family, and now they're all worried, am I going to do this right? Or give them some tips on that whole process.
Yes. Okay. I love to talk to parents that are just starting out, and because there's a lot that we can prevent if we just know and have the tools. And so I would say a couple of things. The first thing is, as adults, be as healthy as you can be, entering into marriage and into parenthood. So dealing with old wounds or dealing with any emotional unhealthiness in our own lives is really important.
Yeah.
And then creating a marriage that is strong and healthy and a good role model for children. You want a marriage that represents the beauty of a man and a woman coming together, and the cohesiveness and the unity that can occur and that should occur, the team working together as a team. So creating a marriage that's healthy is a foundation for parenting. And then I think of parenting I think of it as having two different aspects that both are important and have to both need to be there. So I call it, the one aspect I call the connecting, and there's several things within the connecting, and the other is directing. So I talk about how it's really parenting is both connecting and directing. The connecting refers to the emotional nurture and the love and the connection, the relationship that a parent needs to have with their child, and meeting the child's emotional needs. That's the connecting, and I can say more about that. And then the directing is that refers to the other aspects of parenting: teaching, instructing, equipping, having boundaries, protecting, that kind of thing. So it's both that nurture and that nurture and structure, or connecting and directing. And I can go into more detail
Sure.
about what each of those entail.
Yeah, go ahead.
Great. All right. So with the connecting, the first thing is time. One of the things I find is that we're so busy in our culture, especially in American culture.
Yeah.
I can really only speak for that, but that we're so busy, and that what I heard, there's a saying: how does a child spell love? Time.
Mhm.
Time. Spending time is so important for children. It is how they feel loved. So I encourage parents, slow down wherever you can, take time, not just quality time, those great vacations, but quantity time, ongoing time that's not rushed, time at least every day, checking in and connecting with your child. So taking time. The other thing with time is time that's free from distraction. In our technology age, it so often happens that parents and people are distracted by their devices.
Yeah.
So I see that where a parent thinks they're spending time with their child, but really they're on their phone. So I encourage people, put your devices away, lock them in the other room, have times that are set for really talking and connecting and interacting with your children, as well as your spouse and even friends. Take time to set aside time that's quality time. So connecting involves that. It involves time. That's one thing. The other thing is with the connecting is affirmation. Children need to hear that they are special, that they're valued, that they're loved.
Yes.
And you've probably seen this a lot in your ministry, kids who grew up not hearing it, right?
Yeah.
I think you may have even experienced that as a child, right? I don't know if you're going to say anything about that, but.
Yeah, my parents, my father never told me he loved me, never hugged me. It was just this emotional distance. And that was a major factor in creating a father wound in me, because I perceived it as me being wrong.
Yes.
He wasn't connecting with me because there was something wrong with me, that I was unlovable, I was defective. And so it created this whole world of self-hatred in me.
Yes, that's what children will do. They'll personalize it. There's something wrong with me.
Yeah.
But they need both the affirmation, the verbal affirmation, as well as what you said, the affection. And so connecting involves both of that. It involves the time, like I said. It also involves verbally affirming your child and demonstrating physical affection. And some parents are not comfortable doing that. If a parent grew up without verbal affirmation, or if a parent grew up without affection, they may feel very awkward trying to give that to their child.
Yeah.
I encourage parents to really pray for God to equip them to do what doesn't come natural. That we really do have to push past our own comfort zone and our own feelings of awkwardness to meet the needs of our children. Once we know that there's a need, then we can go to God and say, God, I'm awkward. I don't feel comfortable with this. Fill me with your love. Give me the ability to demonstrate this love to my child in ways that my child needs.
Yeah.
So even if a parent doesn't feel comfortable, I encourage them to really push through that to meet the needs of their child. So it's all of those things.
Another thing I've seen is sometimes parents grow up liking one child more than the other. In fact, not liking a certain child altogether because of their personality. And so they just let the other parent take over the full job of parenting that child because they don't like them. What should parents do if that's happening to them, that they're beginning to choose favorites and these sorts of things?
Yes, I think they have to realize it's not an option to not like a child. Favoritism is so destructive.
Yeah.
And that again is where God really can help us, saying, God, fill me with your love for this child. Let me see the child through your eyes. Because often when a parent is favoring one over the other, it's probably that the one they don't connect with is reminding them of something. It's pushing buttons. Sometimes child is reminding them of themselves. Maybe they see things they don't like themselves.
Yes.
Or especially if there's a bad marriage or a divorce situation, a child might remind the parent of the other parent. And so they might, especially if they're divorced, they might see in their child their ex-spouse and then take it out on the child. And that really can't go on. That is something that I recommend really praying, God, help me overcome this. Fill me with love. Let me see them through your eyes. Let me not see my spouse. Let me not see myself. Let me see the good in them. Let me see their value, and let me convey to them how lovable they are.
Yeah.
So yes, and definitely in a marriage situation where there is that favoritism, you can work together as a team to keep one another, accountable, and help one another to bond and connect with the other child, and not just accept, okay, that one's yours and this one's mine. They both need to be loved by both parents, or they all need to be loved by both parents.
And then there's the flip side, the child who doesn't like one of the parents. I had a very stark experience in that regard. And if a parent perceives that the child doesn't like them, maybe the parent gives up at that point because they've done their best or whatever. But in my situation, my father was a severe disciplinarian, and he was spanking me quite severely one night. And I just said in my own mind, you don't love me, and so I don't love you. You're not my parent anymore, and I'm not your son. So I made this vow, this inner vow, and I cut myself off from this very source of masculinity. The father is the primary source for imparting that into a child, and I just cut myself off from him, and I hardly talked to him at all from that point on. Yes. And surely he perceived that and perhaps gave up. He didn't know what to do with that.
Yes, that does happen, where a child puts up a wall or cuts themselves off, and then later the parent might want to try to connect and find that they just can't get through. Yeah. When that's happening, I encourage parents to really try to get to the bottom of it. So it can either be through really digging to explore what hurt has occurred, what have I done that has hurt you and caused you to put up these walls. So a parent needs to be ready to hear it, though, and so that requires having an understanding that they have, the parent has to realize, I have value and worth, yet I will make mistakes. I have made a mistake. I'm ready to own it. I'm ready to accept it. I'm not going to let it turn into shame where I hate myself now and I get defensive. Sometimes if parents are full of shame, they do get defensive. They can't hear their faults because they feel like they are completely worthless. So having a sense of worth and value and identity, to be able to say, what have I done? I'm so sorry. I want to make it right. And being willing to face it and hear it and try to make it right. Now, some kids, if they've cut off really early on, they may not remember. For you, you remember specifically when you cut off. And some do remember like a turning point, that this was the breaking point and this is what happened. And that's really helpful. For some, it may require therapy to kind of help, the therapist can help draw some of that out and begin to help the child articulate what has gone wrong. So if a parent isn't able to really break through and understand, then getting outside help might be important. Yeah. But I would start with really seeking to understand and recognizing there's been a wound, and wounds can be healed, but you have to really first know what it is you're dealing with.
Yeah, and one of the reasons I rejected my father was because I perceived rejection from him.
Yes.
And so, I like to tell people, if you're the father in this scenario, or the mother if it's a girl, one of the things you could do would be to start looking for what you can affirm in that child, and just point it out every time you see it. Ask the Lord to show you stuff that you could affirm, and maybe that would reconnect.
Yes. Oh, that's great. That is yes. And sometimes if you look for what children are, if a parent will start to look for the good and look for what a child's doing right and convey that, not only will can help to bring a connection, like you're saying, also you can even see troubling behavior begin to change in a child. I talk to parents who their child is, getting into trouble. They have certain bad habits. Often, if a parent will focus on what they're good at, what the child is good at, what the child's doing right, focus on the positives, sometimes by calling attention to what they're doing right, it can snowball into more right behavior, and those wrong
Yes,
behaviors can begin to dissipate. So that's a
absolutely.
very good approach.
Yeah.
Yes, for sure.
So
Yeah.
what if you have a child who's been sexually abused and you now know about it? What can the parent do to help mend such wounds?
Yeah.
That's a
Yes.
very complicated situation, isn't it?
Yes, for sure. And I would say professional help is important then
Yeah.
with sexual abuse. And one of the things, even for some parents, sometimes sexual abuse is not that obvious, or it's not brought to the parents' attention. A lot of
Yeah.
times this happens, secretly, and children are afraid to talk about it, or they've been manipulated into keeping silent. So that goes back to kind of what I was saying about connecting. It's so important to be tuned in. And I think in our busy culture, it's easy to be so busy doing, a lot of times there are two parents both working, and there's very little time with the children. And I always recommend, if it's possible, to not be working so many hours, or if it's possible for one parent, for the mom especially, to be with her children, that it really does benefit the children, but also the parent being able to have the wherewithal to be tuned in and focused. So with sexual abuse, you might see a change in behavior on the child's part. They may not admit what's going on, but you may see a change in
Yes.
behavior. You may see them being more emotional. You might see indicators. But if parents don't have the time or aren't tuned in, they may miss that.
Yeah.
So some of the intervening starts with being connected and really tuned into what's going on in the child's life. And that comes with time, honestly, spending time on a daily basis, interacting with your child.
And maybe a session or two with them where you just talk about what predators can do to people. And if that ever happens to you, I want you to come to me, because I love you, and I want to walk through that with you.
Definitely. And the other thing is being approachable. So explaining and teaching children, equipping them to understand, good touch, bad touch, what's okay, what's not okay, strangers, predators, all of that. But also showing the child over time, telling them and showing them that you're safe and approachable.
Yeah.
And this is another aspect of connecting that I talk with parents about, and that is being a good listener and not being reactive to things that children say.
Yeah.
So being curious, wanting to know the heart of the child, not just wanting to know what you want them to think or say, but really being curious. Tell me how you're feeling. Tell me what's going on. Let me understand your heart. Let me understand all that's going on in your life, and having that mindset of curiosity, not reactivity, not being emotionally reactive. So maybe they do share, oh, such and such is happening, staying curious rather than, never having the approach of, now, why would you do that? Why would you,
Exactly.
thinking that reactive approach. I love James 1:19. It says, be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to becoming angry. So listening more than we're talking, drawing them out, and not becoming angry, not getting reactive to what they say. So really being curious and showing your children that you're safe and they can tell you anything, and you're not going to react emotionally or angrily, but that you'll want to hear and understand and help them with whatever it is they're going through. That's really important.
Yeah, I have a good example of how that can happen, even unbeknownst to the parent. And this is beyond sexual abuse. This is in general. This can happen. Let's say you're a 6 or 7 or 8-year-old child. You come home from school very excited over something that's happened at school. You race into the kitchen where your parents are sitting there with coffee or something, and you just pour out your heart what just happened to you, and you're so excited. And they tell you to shut up and go to your room.
Yes.
Well, what they've just done to you is told you that you can't share your deep heart with them.
Yes, exactly. There's such a great verse, Romans 12:15, that speaks to that. That says, rejoice with those that rejoice and weep with those that weep. It's a great verse, not only in parenting, even in marriage and friendship. The idea that if someone's excited, get excited with them.
Yeah.
Even if you don't think what they're excited about is worth it, enter their shoes, see the world through their eyes, see what they're thinking and where they're coming from, and join with them.
Yeah.
And if they're sad, be sad with them.
Yeah.
That's another thing I talk about with parents is empathizing and then validating their feelings. So
Yeah.
whether they're happy or sad, so
Yeah.
getting excited with them. The thing about validating their feelings when they're sad, sometimes parents have a hard time with this. Even spouses or friends can have a hard time with this. When we see someone we love sad, sometimes our instinct is to want to cheer them up right away.
Mm.
And it can kind of invalidate their feelings if we're in too big of a rush to cheer them
Yeah.
up. So in other
Yeah.
words, if someone's sad and we say, well, come on, look on the bright side, all things work together for good. It's not that bad. It's not that big of a deal. That can cause someone to feel not heard,
Yeah.
not understood, not validated. And there's a great verse for this one also. I believe it's Proverbs 20:25 that says, he who sings songs to a heavy heart is like one who takes away a garment on a cold day. In other words, if someone is down, they're heavy hearted, and you sing songs like, it's okay, cheer up, it's not that bad, get over it. That's like taking away their coat in the middle of winter. They're they're left freezing or shivering. And the verse goes on to say, or it's like vinegar poured on soda. It has a sizzling effect. If someone is down and we're up saying, come on, cheer up, stop, then it has a sizzling effect. It leaves them cold.
Mm.
So we join them instead. Now, there's always time later to say, well, God will work this out, but not right away. First, join them in their pain and weep with those that weep and validate their feelings.
That is so good. Gosh.
Sometimes that alone will cheer a person up, just knowing that someone else is hurting with them or someone else is in it with them.
Yeah.
And then you don't even have to say anything else.
Exactly. It's like when you have somebody who dies and you just don't say anything to them. You just hug them.
Yes. Just be in it with them. Exactly. Yeah. Yes.
Well, we've only got a few minutes left, so let's do a cliff notes on. We've talked about connecting, and give me the other subject that you wanted to connect with that.
Yes. Okay. So I see parenting as it's connecting, and it's also the directing. Directing is the teaching them, equipping them, having boundaries. In our culture now, in the time that we're living, we really need to have boundaries around internet exposure and things like that kids are able to get into so easily. So guarding and protecting our children and having all the structure in place. That part is also an important part of parenting. If sometimes parents lean more heavily on the connecting and they're not as good on the structure or the rules or the boundaries. And sometimes parents lean too hard on the rules and the boundaries. I think your dad was a strict disciplinarian, no love, and he was extreme in his discipline. So sometimes we can lean more heavily on the structure, but not the connecting part where we're tuning in and hearing their heart. So it's about both. And ultimately, parenting is really modeling God's heart for us, his children. Earthly parents modeling to their children who God is to us. And I use God's way of parenting us as a model for how we should parent our children. He's slow to anger, abounding in mercy, full of compassion. And yet there is a way he wants us to live. And there are blessings and there are consequences. When we live God's way, there are blessings. And when we violate God's ways, there are consequences. And that's an important part of parenting also, having rules that children understand, and then consequences that are fair, reasonable, never disciplining in anger, those kinds of things. And go ahead.
That's so good. I just wanted to say that. That's so important. Yes. Anything else on your list there?
And I guess the other thing would be in teaching on the directing side of things. I think the things that are most important to teach children is the importance of obedience and respect for authority, because parents are equipping their children to someday relate to their heavenly Father as God, relate to God in a right way. And when parents teach their children to obey and to respect authority, they're ultimately setting them up to obey God and respect God's authority. So that's another aspect of parenting on the directing side of things that's very important. I think, it seems like respect for authority is kind of something that's kind of pushed aside nowadays.
Out the window.
Yes. But that we have a God that loves us more than we can imagine, and he wants us to obey. And we do need to have the utmost respect for him. And children learn that in the home, in the way they relate to their parents and in what parents expect of them.
Yeah.
So
That's so good, Julie. I'm so glad you came on the program. This has been really precious stuff, very important stuff. And I just thank you for coming. And is there a way for people to contact you, or your counseling practice, or what?
Yes, absolutely. They can go to my website. The one I have at the educational tool, homosexuality101.com, has my video explaining the roots and causes. And there's a link to my website that has my email address. And so they can always email and get a hold of me that way.
And I just want to tell you, the Homosexuality 101 should be required viewing by every person on this planet, much less a parent. Even a child, because it really gives a beautiful understanding of the causes and the healing process with homosexual neurosis. So I'm so glad you came and watched us today. Send a link to people that you know would benefit by this. We're on video now on YouTube. The channel is David Kyle Foster. And then we're on podcast audio on the Charisma Podcast Network and Spotify and various other places. So make sure you take full advantage of what you've just learned in these last two sessions. Make sure you listen to the first one as well. I'm so glad you tuned in. I know you now have hope, and you've been informed in an outstanding way. And I just bless you in the name of Jesus Christ. We'll see you next time. God bless.
Thank you for listening to today's podcast. Remember, much of Dr. Foster's teaching has been taken from his new book entitled Sexual Healing Reference Edition, available at our website, masteringlife.org. This podcast and our many other resources are available because of our donors. If you are one of them, thank you. If you would like to join in supporting us, please visit masteringlife.org.